Hi there, everyone. I am Katherine Cooper. I'm a shareholder at the law firm of Murphy McGonigle, and I'm really excited to be here for a fireside chat with former commissioner of the CFTC, Brian Quintenz. Thank you, Brian, for coming.
Thanks, Katherine. It's great to be with you. Thanks to the Global DCA and TAB for having me.
Yeah. And so because it's 70 degrees here in New York today, we had to get rid of the fireside, so I hope people aren't too disappointed about that.
Well, they won't be disappointed. I don't have to give my usual disclaimers anymore either, and bore them to death. So we can get straight into the meat.
That's right. So one thing I wanted to chat with you about was acting CFTC Chairman Benham's recent hearing before the Senate Agricultural Committee regarding his nomination to be the full-time acting chair. And he got some press attention for testifying that the market for digital assets has grown to some $2.7 trillion in notional size, and asserted that 60% of those digital assets are commodities. And then just a few days later, the next week, Chairman Gensler over at the SEC mentioned that stablecoins represent, in terms of market value, 80% of the transactional notional volume. What's your thinking about some of these statements? I mean, the press seems to have, in order to sell papers or clicks or views or something these days, and perhaps suggesting these two statements are in conflict with each other.
Yeah, so I think, first off, I watched Acting Chairman Benham's hearing, and I thought he did a spectacular job. I was really proud of him. Not only did I really value serving alongside of him, but I consider him a friend. I also thought it was notable and wonderful that our former colleague Don Stump was in the audience with him. And while they are now only two people at a commission, and so our sunshine acted out of being able to communicate, at least that seemed like a safe venue to do it in the sunlight of Congress, so to speak. So I reflect on that as I reflected on my time at the agency, in thinking that there's a collegiality that I witnessed when I was there among the commissioners, among the commissioners' staff, and among the staff of the agency. And, I think that made it a wonderful place to work. And I think, I saw that in my counterparts at the SEC, and I was given the opportunity to work, with the SEC through being delegated as a kind of a harmonization point of contact by Chris Giancarlo, and then again by Heath Tarbert. So, I saw the agencies operate when they had very good working relationship, when I think there was a view from the top that they needed to have a good working relationship. I don't know where that stands right now. I think that that's a little scary, a little possibly disappointing if it's changed, because what I have seen is, one person and one regulator in particular try to create political momentum to using existing authorities to capture as much of this landscape as possible. I don't think that's appropriate. I think if Congress wants this jurisdiction to be under someone's agency's authorities, it needs to make that decision as an Article 1 body, with the votes of the members, creating the feedback loop to the constituents that put them there and answering further decisions. So, one thing that I see in reflecting on that time period and Acting Chairman Benham's hearing was starting to add the CFTC's voice to this debate, which up until that point, I think because of the nature of the confirmation process, the nature of the nomination process, and the nature of the confirmation process required a lot of discretion. And I was thrilled to see him step up to the plate and talk about those things. I don't see necessarily conflict between Acting Chairman Benham talking about 60% of crypto market cap being commodities. I think what he's referring to are Bitcoin and Ether, which comprise more than a majority of the market cap of crypto assets, vis-a-vis the idea that stable coins in their notional volume somehow creates a jurisdictional hook from the SEC. First of all, I don't understand that second part, and secondly, payment transactions are by nature very large. I think PayPal did $300 billion of transactions in the second quarter of 2021. And they're not under the CFTC's jurisdiction. I'm not sure what their jurisdiction is with the SEC. They're certainly not regulated by FSOC as a systemically important financial institution. So I think I don't necessarily understand the stablecoin tie-in in discussing market cap of or notional volume metrics in terms of a jurisdictional discussion.
Sure. I mean, there's some assumption that stablecoins could be a security, in which case that would give the SEC a claim of jurisdiction over them. But
possibly not. In fact, it was the CFTC, and I'm going to jump ahead because you told me you wanted to ask about stablecoin and the CFTC's authority and Tether specifically. So maybe we can just jump there right now.
Sure.
Because I think that was a very important way for the commission to not only exercise its authority, but also show that at least how that stablecoin represented itself, was a commodity. It could be purchased 100% for cash, and it was supposed to be redeemed 100% for cash, and it was advertised as being 100% backed by cash. So, at least from my perspective, there is a model that has been shown, by a regulator for a non-security stablecoin product. I think there are a lot of other models that could exist that don't allow them, to come under a securities framework. There is a very valid question of, if a firm is standing in the middle and using investment management techniques to create yield for themselves and capturing that, whether or not that invokes the traditional investment management regulations that are under either the SEC or the CFTC's jurisdiction. But even if it does, that doesn't mean that model is the only model that can exist for stablecoins. Stablecoins, in fact, are not that frequently redeemed. They're transacted into other kinds of products, but they're used because they're incredibly efficient to power a lot of the innovation that we are seeing in the blockchain space.
So another thing that Russ suggested during his testimony at his nomination hearing was that the digital asset marketplace needs a cop on the beat, and that the CFTC was prepared to be that cop if the Ag Committee and the rest of Congress would give it that authority. Do you think the CFTC is prepared to be the cop on the beat, and what do you see as the building blocks to be the proper cop on the beat for the digital asset marketplace?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily know that there has to be, and I think as I interpret those comments, it's not as if there are no cops on the beat. In fact, the CFTC is already a cop on the beat because we have anti-fraud and anti-manipulation authority over spot commodity transactions. But the question is there a federal, oversight, regulatory oversight regime over the crypto marketplace or the trading of crypto products? And there is not. They do have to follow AML KYC requirements that are issued through FinCEN. They are registered as state money transmitters, and they are exposed, obviously to fraud and manipulation violations that the CFTC could prosecute. So, it's not as if this is an unregulated space. There are regulations, there are laws that they have to follow. There is reporting that has to be done. But if Congress decides to allow for a new federal regulatory market regime for crypto trading, I think it makes sense to consider the CFTC, given that it's in our derivatives markets that Bitcoin and Ether futures contracts trade. We have done extensive, the CFTC, I'm not there anymore, I keep saying we, but the CFTC has done extensive research and gotten comfortable with physically settled Bitcoin contracts, derivatives contracts, which means that those products have to be custodied, within our existing custody infrastructure, and how we've had to think about our rules to allow for that, how the CFTC has had to make sure it's up to speed on custody solutions and risks, and so there's a lot of work that's already been done there. From an oversight perspective, from the derivatives markets, regulatory regime that I think could inform good, smart, appropriate regulation in the trading of spot crypto commodity assets. So I think it's it makes some sense. And throughout my entire time there, the CFTC was always an agency that rose to the challenge. They have a great staff. It's a small agency. By federal government standards, certainly smaller than some of our counterparts. So I think there's a legitimate question as to where this should fall in the CFTC's priorities if it isn't given additional resources to do the job. And so but those are debates for Congress to have. Congress could choose to give the agency the authority but not the funding. It could choose to give the agency both, or it could choose to give it neither. But again, to me, it's important to have Congress make this decision and not any individual regulator that's trying to cry wolf. So
the President's Working Group recently came out with a report and recommendations on stablecoins, suggesting that stablecoins might fit most comfortably within sort of banking regulation. What's your thinking about that? And how does that fit in with the CFTC's action in Tether?
So I was curious about the stablecoin report because I think it briefly described some of the landscape of stablecoins, and the landscape is broad, and so I don't think the entire landscape of stablecoins fits anywhere because of how broad it is. And I think there's an argument to make that some format of a stablecoin could look like a demand deposit, but I don't think that regulators or policymakers want to just fit something into a box and wipe their hands from it when they aren't necessarily sure what that means for the innovation that could develop, or how it could hamper or constrain that innovation. So I've always maintained that instead of trying to fit these into an existing regime, let's understand where the innovation is going. And where the innovation is going is enthralling. It is very exciting. It is going to decentralize ownership of networks to allow the individuals that create value to obtain that value. It's the next iteration of the web and the next iteration of computing combined together. It's really decentralized autonomous organizations are going to change how certain entities, even potentially communities, govern themselves. And the exciting thing is what we can't see. When we look back on the development of smartphones, I think it was easy to look at that technology through the lens of our laptops or our desktops and say, okay, well, now I can check the weather, on my phone. Now I can do, word programming, word processing on my phone. Now I can have a calendar with me every time I go somewhere. But what we didn't really understand was that it was going to create a huge new economy based off of geolocation services. That it was going to create a huge new entertainment system based off of people connecting, their phones, pictures, and videos to a crowdsourced, entertainment streaming service. So the exciting part is what we can't see. And I would hate for us to preclude that development by trying to fit something into a box because we think it might look like it. So the bottom line is I wouldn't do that yet.
Given the significant role, though, that stablecoins do play in both the centralized crypto marketplace ecosystem and then also the decentralized crypto marketplace, would there be benefit to market stability for them to be regulated? In some sense, similar to what we, both with how the CFTC oversees futures commission merchants, which is the Commodity Exchange Act's fancy word for futures brokers, because they're holding other people's money, right? They're holding their customers' money, and there are certain fairly significantly detailed regulations about how you hold somebody else's money if you're a futures broker. Same thing for a broker-dealer in the securities market. Same thing for a bank. So do you think that, you obviously think, I assume that there needs to be regulation, but we need to be careful about not just slapping some current model onto stablecoins because it might not fit.
Yeah, I think that there's certainly a case to be made for some stablecoin products and how they're designed and what they say or promise, that you can redeem them, for the amount of money for which you can redeem them, that regulation and or transparency or both in terms of, how those funds are held and into what they are invested, there's a rational argument there. But again, the stablecoin landscape is very broad. And at one end of the spectrum are stablecoins that are issued through New York trust companies. One of the things that I thought was surprising was the OCC suggesting that they should only be issued by insured depository institutions. That seems to supersede any state's trust laws in terms of being able to offer those products. And I don't know why the former is a better model than the latter. It seems just like it's a potential arbitrary choice, or at least if it's not, to me, I didn't necessarily see the rationale in it. But there are stablecoins that currently exist in the marketplace that are being offered through highly regulated state trust charters.
That's a very good point. I don't think that the state regulators have a voice in the president's working group, so that might have something to do with it. Well, since we have only about 10 minutes left, and the conference's name is DeFi-ing Expectations, if we could maybe move on to some recent comments that your former commission colleague Dan Berkovitz made back in June to, I think, the SIFMA's Asset Management Group conference folks, and also a paper that current SEC Commissioner Caroline Crenshaw issued just the other day, maybe yesterday, kind of calling into question some issues around whether or how to regulate DeFi. Do you have some thoughts about some of those questions and some of those concerns that both Dan and Caroline articulated?
Yeah, so I don't think anything that I read was unfair, but I would personally take a different view, and I wouldn't want to focus only on a rigid definition of an activity. I'd want to try to understand, to what degree is this space really competing against the regulated marketplace? Are they offering completely different kinds of products that no one in the regulated space is offering? Is no one in the regulated space offering those products because they can't, or because they don't like them, or they don't understand them? What is the degree of unfair, or what is the degree of unfair competition, or even a lack of competition in this space? Because I think, former Commissioner Berkovitz, made the comment around, the fair competition mandate of the agency, but also acknowledges, as I've long advocated, we have a pro-innovation mandate as well. And so, to the extent that those two are in tension, I think we have the agency has some hard decisions to make, and I would hope that it would be patient and thoughtful about how to make those decisions and ensure that, if it decided to take an enforcement action, if it couldn't help itself and take an enforcement action, that there's something on the other side of that, that there's an ability to bring someone into, a regulatory compliant regime that doesn't sacrifice their business model or the innovation that's occurring. And I'm not sure that's the case at this point. So, I can understand the temptation to want to, throw our old definitions, onto this space and assume that there's a fair competition argument, but I'm not sure that that actually is the case right now. So, it's not to say that the agency doesn't have a tough job. I think they do. And I think as you look at a lot of the DeFi platforms, they have moved significantly towards decentralization, but they've also moved to, wall off on a geographical basis U.S. clients from certain products, which, is not necessarily a requirement that they do. And I would be worried if, regulators are threatening them with needing to take more action on their own behalf to prevent, U.S. clients from accessing them. At some point, it's U.S. customers taking actions that are violating the law and not an entity that didn't do every conceivable thing possible to prevent a U.S. customer from accessing their platform.
My next question is sort of based off an experience I had when I was the Chief Regulatory Officer for Futures Exchange in Ivy Life US, which is a mouthful. We all got into the office one Sunday afternoon for the first opening of our Eurodollar futures contract that was going to compete against the CME's, grand enterprise of their Eurodollar, products. And we had champagne on ice. And so our market opens. And then we realized that not all the delivery months were trading at the tick size that was set forth in our rule book. So the champagne didn't get drunk that night. A lot of coffee did. And we had to fix it. In a DeFi structure, obviously, and then the next day that led to some unpleasant conversations with folks at CFTC, DMO. But anyway, in a DeFi structure, what happens if something goes wrong like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I also think it's a different model. The smart contracts that trade on DeFi protocols are open source, have a level of transparency to them, can be publicly audited by programmers and code developers. There's now an economy around, it's called bug bounties, paying off white hat actors to try to, stress test, a smart contract or, DeFi protocol systems to prevent that from happening. And so, but the other issue with that is that, the more transparency there is there on an open source basis, the more easily you can have innovation be built right on top of that. And so, there is an amazing cycle here of transparency, competition, innovation, and the rewards from that process that, loop back in to create a virtuous cycle. So, I think, I think it's a good question. And I think the teams that at least are trying to launch are working hard to prevent those things from happening right off the bat. But one of the things that I have always valued about this ecosystem is the tremendous amount of individual responsibility that market participants take. And I think that deserves to be acknowledged and it deserves to be protected. And the more we stand up institutions, regulatory institutions or intermediaries in between them, the more you erode at that, I think, very important market check.
Well, you don't seem to have any questions. If anyone has any questions, you can submit them. But not seeing any, I think I can thank you, Brian, for your thoughts and sharing your thoughts today, and wish you well in your future endeavors as a civilian again. And thank you for your service. I mean, the CFTC, for folks who aren't paying attention, got a lot done during Brian's tenure. Did an amazing amount of work, thoughtful work. So I want to thank you, Brian, for your service, both in the traditional future space and also in being innovative in the cryptocurrency space. So I want to thank Tab. I want to thank Tab. I want to thank Global DCA for our chance to share some thoughts with you today. Thank you.
Thanks very much.